But the kids are not okay, right? I think that's very clear to all of us. We've seen 2+ years of school shutdowns. We now have really no accountability, if we ever did, right? We to look back at how the kids are doing now, we're looking at 2019 data, and CRT is an excuse for educational failure. And so we're not really seeing how the kids are doing in school. So how are the kids in America? And I'll let any of you start. I wanted to have a real discussion about what are your concerns, what are the things that we kind of know are happening, are there any things we don't know are happening, and what can we do about some of those things?
Well, I'll give you some on-the-ground information. Like I said, we do run 3 charter schools in Florida at this time. Our first school opened in 2019, so we were interrupted by the pandemic in the middle of our first school year, and our second school was already ready to go for 2020, so we opened that one in the middle of the pandemic, and then the third school in 2021. So we haven't known a school year yet without some pandemic disruption, and they're all affiliated with Hillsdale College. You heard about that earlier, and we're running and implementing that wonderful, amazing classical curriculum. 2 of those schools are more in middle-class suburban communities. One is in downtown Jacksonville. It's more of an urban community. But I'll tell you right now that all of those children, especially those that were coming to us from outside the school, meaning they didn't return from one school to the other, it didn't matter where they were coming from. Private schools, public schools, they're behind. They're very, very behind. In our urban school, we had half of our students coming in were 2 or more grade levels behind. And we brought in the first year 450 students, and the second year another 400 students in downtown Jacksonville. And it's about 55% free and reduced lunch. And so it's not just those students. It's not just the students in poverty that are behind. It's also students, and when I talk about my first school, Treasure Coast Classical Academy in Stewart, which is more of a middle-class community, there were kids coming from private schools that were very expensive who were very far behind. And there was no, to your point, accountability or transparency for those parents to know how well those students were doing. And a lot of parents think if they write a big check and their student goes to a prestigious school, that means that they're doing well, they're on grade level, they're going to get into a good college, and that's just not the case. And I like accountability. I'm a proponent of accountability, but I believe accountability comes from transparency, not top-down government, but what the government can do is require a level of transparency that allows parents to make quality decisions about the schools that their children are going to and understand their progress in a meaningful way. So I'm very concerned about what the pandemic has done across our country, especially to our highest need populations. They will never catch up. We will have a generation of children who cannot read and never will be able to read in the manner that they should. We have a generation of children who've lost 2 to 3 years of learning that they will never get back. And it's a real concern, and it should be a real concern for all of us as parents, grandparents, and community members. How are we going to accommodate for what has been lost to this generation? I don't think anyone has figured it out yet, and we can't even really articulate the depth of loss that has occurred as a result of the actions of school districts across the country.
Realistically, we're in the middle of a threefold crisis. We're in the middle of a crisis of academics, we're in the middle of a crisis of behavior, and then we're in the middle of a crisis of moral purpose. So first of all, again, as Erika said, the reading scores are abysmal. For those of you that don't know, and I'm sure most of you in here do know because you do your research, if you don't start reading well by 3rd grade, you will be crippled for life in your reading and comprehension. It is a long-lasting thing. It's very well documented on multiple sides of the academic spectrum. And we have students right now, a vast majority of students in this country that have been crippled in their ability of reading and comprehension that is not being made up. There is a quashing of the term learning loss that is going on, which is bewildering to me. I cannot believe that in this country we have media outlets like EdWeek and like Chalkbeat and like Edutopia that are on purpose making sure learning loss does not make it into their articles, because that would intone that the actions of many of the administration and many of the media in the last couple of years are responsible for lifetime consequences of our students academically. You want to talk about inequity. I want to see students who are already struggling from the situations that they've come from now. They don't know how to read. They can't do basic mathematics. They don't know civics. God knows Paul and I have talked about how they have no functional understanding of science and STEM, as is evidenced in gender theory. It's ridiculous. And I've seen it in rural, suburban, inner city. It's awful. Number two, we have a huge crisis of behavior. My wife hates going to her job some days because there are students that if they are violent and hit her in her pregnant stomach, they will be maybe taken out of the room and then brought back not 2 to 3 minutes later, as if nothing was happened. I mean, of course, we've heard what's going on in Loudoun County, and there are cases of sexual assault, and the school's brushing it off and sweeping it under the rug. There are children in our country, again, a huge amount, that have no behavioral understanding, but we just want to teach them that their feelings make them justified, which leads to our third problem, which is a crisis of moral purpose. There is no moral purpose. As the good Reverend said earlier, we have a crisis of materialism where we just say, get all the stuff you want. If someone else has more stuff than you, then you should feel enraged, and then you should want what they have and take it if they don't let you have it. There's no moral character, there's no moral fiber, and it's eating away our country from the inside. So as far as lasting effects, we are going to see a Generation Z and then Generation I Alpha following that is more radically different than any other generation that has walked the face of this earth. And it will be the fight of millennials, Gen Z, and I Alpha who have been raised by good, strong parents in solid foundational homes to rectify the mistakes that have been done in this country and abroad.
I'm going to add, well said, both of you, or all three of you, should I say. Yeah, absolutely. The other thing, I want to take it a step further as well. We're in a spiritual crisis. This is really an issue of good versus evil. And the greatest existential threat to the world is sin. That's just the bottom line. I mean, you can call me either just Bible thumping, whatever, but that's the truth. It's really at the core, it's sin. And so, and I believe our children are in a bad position simply because the families are in a bad position. Once you dismantle the family, everything else goes with it. You know, everything else follows. You know, God's plan is perfect. At the core of every civil society is the family.
That's the first institution he founded.
Absolutely. So, and that means with a father and a mother there to create the balance. Not some of this other made-up nonsense, but the father and the mother creates the balance for the child. The family was ultimately designed to be the first institution by which that child could feel safe. So that's why some of the work that I've done in talking about the importance of fatherhood. You know, fathers do at least 3 things. They affirm, they provide, and they protect. So those are at least 3 minimal things that God do for all of us, right? The other reason why our kids are in a bad position because we have teachers who do absolutely nothing and still get paid. You know, they don't have to show up to work and still keep their contracts because the unions have negotiated some stuff. I've literally watched a teacher not show up to work for 2 years and get tenured. How does that happen in a school? Absolutely, that's absolute craziness. We have school districts all over this country, and I know Baltimore gets picked on, but I'm going to use them because it was public knowledge. But they outspend 97% of all other large school districts in the country, but yet 41% of the student body have less than a D average. And then you add on top of that the virus. Then you add on top of that lack of access to technology, because if they're studying or learning virtually, some of these kids or families can't even get web, access, and then not even to mention the folks in the rural communities. I mean, that's even more of a disaster. That's kind of, that the local media is kind of being quiet on. So we have this compounding kind of an issue, and I just personally believe that, poor teachers need to be fired, period, end of story.
They just need more money. Just give the schools more money. That'll fix it.
We should absolutely not throw money. We also have, and I'm glad he said that, because we also have school districts, and if my wife is watching, she's like, oh, Lord, please don't let him say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. But we have school districts that have been given by foundations millions of dollars to deal with curriculum, but then they come back and then they actually push and pass bond initiatives, right, for another $44.8 million instead of developing or changing the culture. And I told a school board member this. I said, listen, people are not leaving the district because of curriculum. They're leaving because of the culture. Just what you said, a child can punch a teacher, curse them upside down the other, do anything they want, and there's no consequence. That is not how life works. Whatsoever a man sow, that shall he also reap. That stuff comes back. And if we're teaching our kids that you shouldn't have any consequence for your poor behavior, that's absolutely disastrous. You're setting them up to fail, and that's exactly what's happening in our schools.
And Paul and I were chatting about this over the last couple of weeks, and there's such a very weird phenomenon that's going on in this country where we have students that are running these incredible fight accounts. One of the Indianapolis public schools has literally a fight Instagram account where you can watch videos of them fighting. We were at Crispus Attucks High School in Indianapolis, one of the IPS schools. A teacher quit on the way to the meeting, handed her resignation to the principal who was on her way to present to us. And she said, we have requested that students who are being excessively violent been expelled. We've made either 9 or 12 expulsion requests, and the district has approved 0, because you got to keep that funding. So all of those things going on and percolating that we talked about in this school culture, unions get up and say, well, the teachers aren't getting enough money. We're not getting enough time. We're not getting enough resources. Realistically, as teachers, we're fed up with endless professional developments where I'm told I have to rank my class rate of racism by how many black male students I have passing compared to the next teacher that was at Lawrence Township, or whether we're supposed to sit there for nigh on eternity and have our schools misspend our money so they can bring in the Racial Equity Institute from the Carolinas, which charge hundreds of thousands of dollars per visit. And it's incredible to watch the culture of our country be completely ignored by teachers' unions, by these pro-public school organizations that are realistically just pro-status quo and upholding something that's been broken for nigh on half a century.
So I think that brings us to a really good point. We're talking a lot about culture and a lot about behavior. And one of the things that Tina and I recognize, and we've seen as school board members, unfortunately, the public education system, and as it has grown and grown and grown and taken over so many different aspects of our children's lives, has allowed parents to abdicate their responsibilities to a certain degree. Right? And so I think it's important as communities, as parents, that we recognize that we need to be partners in our children's education. We will not co-parent with the government. You know that. You see some T-shirts in here today, right? But we do want to partner with our children's teachers. So let's talk a little bit. We spent about a half an hour talking about some problems, and we've spent a lot of time talking about that, right?